In March 2024, the Falkland Islands Government launched the Equalities project, which aims to introduce a new and modernized legislation which will provide legal protection from discrimination. As part of the project, FIG launched the Community Views Survey on Equality and Discrimination in the Falkland Islands. The survey ran between the 4th of September and the 30th of October last year. The aim of the survey was to better understand public perspective on equality and discrimination in the Falkland Islands and to ensure a data-driven approach for the policy formulation.
Any work when it comes to human rights or implementation of international human rights commitments, it starts with the legislation on equalities and non-discrimination. Because the access to human rights has to be through the lens of equalities and non-discrimination and ensuring that everyone has access to human rights in a country. So from an international human rights point of view, this work is extremely important. Most importantly, I think working on implementation of international human rights commitment for a country like Falkland Islands can be important in terms of having that voice in UN structures and global diplomacy around implementation of human rights.
261 people participated in the survey, which is approximately 10% of the adult population in the Falkland Islands. Majority of the respondents identified as female, predominantly living in Stanley, with the most participants being between 25 to 64 years old. 71% of survey respondents stated they were Falkland Islanders or Falkland Island status holders. 11% stated they hold a permanent residence permit, and 18% stated they were a work permit holder.
I think in order to understand the survey results, it's important to see who answered the survey questions and the people who participated in the survey in the first place. I think this information tells us how engaged the community is. And I think the fact that we have such a high proportion of people who are Falkland Islanders or Falkland Island status holders who've responded to the survey, it shows the interest of the community in sort of like defining future policies when it comes to issues of equalities and non-discrimination. And obviously we would look at that as a huge success, because at the end of the day, these policies are for the Falkland Islanders, and the biggest stakeholder has made sure that their voice is incorporated in the process. And in terms of the number of people who participated, I think the feedback that we've received is that this is a good number of people. Even when we launched the survey and the sort of information sessions that we were holding, we were constantly stating our idea that at the end of the day, it's a data-driven process. So whatever data or feedback we receive from the community, that feedback is going into the work that we are doing. From that point of view, I think the service was really helpful, especially some of the comments that I went through in terms of telling us and guiding us as to how the Equalities project needs to be shaped up.
The survey results show that a high proportion of respondents think that the Falkland Islands is an inclusive community. However, most respondents believe that discrimination happens in the Falkland Islands, with only a small proportion believing that it doesn't. Additionally, over half of respondents feel they have been subject to discrimination in the Falkland Islands, and a large proportion of people feel they had witnessed discrimination happening to another person. Some of the respondents expanded that they believe instances of direct and indirect discrimination, harassment, and victimization occur in the Falkland Islands, which include racism, xenophobia or fear of strangers, sexism, ableism or discrimination of disabilities, ageism or discrimination of elderly, and homophobia. The survey also included a list of grounds which are most frequently associated with discrimination, and each of them were highly supported by the respondents to become protected characteristics in the future legislation.
The 9 grounds were informed by international human rights commitments as well as European Court of Human Rights judgments. Under these grounds, it sort of like tells us that these are the main points that we need to start with. The survey told us what the community perspective is, what the community feels about these grounds when it comes to seeing these grounds as protected characteristics in future legislation. And it was really interesting because mostly the threshold was really high. It was above 50% for all 9 grounds of protection, but it sort of like gave us an idea about how to prioritize our future work and what areas we need to work on first.
The survey was only a first step of the information gathering part of the Equality project. The Equalities team already held focus groups and will soon move on to the next phase, which is in-depth discussions with individuals who will interact with the future equality legislation as part of their job role.
Because we have an open approach to policy development, in the Equalities project, the Community View Survey was just one platform through which we were gathering data. We conducted 5 focus groups in February. We spoke to persons who self-identified as Falkland Islanders. We spoke to persons who are here on work permit holders, persons with a disability or a carer, persons in the tourism industry or people who interact with visitors, and members of the LGBTQAI+ community. The focus groups were interesting in the sense that the survey had more of a quantitative view. We got numbers, we got percentages, but the focus groups gave us a new dimension of what the issues are, what particular groups in the Falkland Islands face, and most importantly, qualitative data. After the focus groups, the third phase of our information gathering is in-depth discussions where we're talking to people whose professional roles will interact with future equalities policy or legislation. So we have a list of around 45 to 50 people that we are in the process of speaking to, just to understand from a professional perspective what impact the future equalities policy or legislation can have. So once our information gathering is complete, we will move towards policy formulation.
The Equality project is a significant piece of work, which is just at the beginning stages, and it will take some time before we will see the finalized legislation. However, current prediction is that the policy paper will be in place by July 2026.
So basically within 2 years we were supposed to come up with a policy paper. So we are thinking July 2026 we will have the policy paper in place. When it comes to the legislative interventions, I think we will be looking at what are the characteristics that we need to introduce. We will be looking at the grievance redressal forum and process, and then the most important part of it in terms of monitoring and evaluation, like how do we track implementation of the legislation. We will be introducing legislation in a phased approach just so that it's manageable in terms of implementation. So what our vision right now is that we have the basic legislation in place in terms of what the structures are or how the grievance redressal mechanisms are going to operate, and then phase by phase we add the protected characteristics, and against each protected characteristics we will have its own regulations in order to define to what extent that particular characteristic is protected.
The Equality project is far from being finished, yet the team has also set short and medium-term goals to work on, alongside with the work on the new legislation.
We are not waiting for the policy and the legislation to come in place. Whatever short and medium-term goals that we can achieve and implement at the moment, we're sort of like already working on that. So we're looking at how to mainstream equalities in sort of like executive decision making, how to mainstream equalities in legislative processes. I mean, we have sort of like devised a checklist and some of the questions that decision makers need to be asking when they are basically sort of like deciding or reaching certain decisions. What are the equalities considerations they need to bear in mind? What this also does is that this creates a conducive environment for future legislation to be in place. We're also looking at training and capacity development initiatives. What training and capacity development courses or trainings are already available? How can we embed equalities modules within those existing trainings? So this is some of the short and medium term goals that we are trying to achieve in the process.
The work on modernizing and creating the equality policy and legislation is significant for protecting the community from discrimination and unfair treatment. And according to the public engagement with the survey and focus groups, the project has been welcomed and supported by members of the community.